Live event has started.
Good evening all. Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee of the 11th of November 2021. Apologies for the chair, John Baker. He's having some problems with his internet. Can we take the other apologies for absence, please, Pam?
No problem, Chair. And we have Councillor Whitcutt, Councillor Giles and Councillor White has sent apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest?
No.
No, thank you very much.
No,
Chair, just one observation. Pedantically, your Newport logo is mirror imaged.
All right, it often is. I'd love to be able to get it to stay there permanently. I'll have one more try at it.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's it, I'm afraid. Anyway, that aside, can we move on to the minutes of the last meeting, please? For accuracy, page 3, page 4.
Okay, I found this on the web for page 3, page 4. Check it out.
Somebody has an assistant.
Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. Can somebody propose that there are reasonable records?
Yeah, I agree with that, Chair.
Thank you. Is it seconded?
Seconded. Remotely.
Any actions arising then, please? Action on the senior finance business partner. Are you taking that, Reese? We're on page 7.
I think that's for Myrian, Chair, and colleagues.
All right. Myrian, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Will you just remind me again? Sorry, which?
We're on page, bottom of page 6, going into page 7. Actions against the senior finance business partner.
Yeah, the accounts have been adjusted, Chair.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Do you want to come back to us on that one, Myrian?
Sorry, Chair. My colleague has just indicated that that action has been completed.
Yeah, all of them. There are 4 actions there.
So yes, and the presentation that we'll be taking you through on the annual accounts deals with all of those queries as well. So we'll be going through them in detail later in the main agenda, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4 then, please. Q1 corporate risk register update. Reese, is that you?
Absolutely, Chair. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Chair and Committee. So this is the Q1 corporate risk register. just to remind the committee, the role of the committee is to monitor the arrangements in place and make recommendations to Cabinet based on those arrangements. So can just remind you of that. Previously, we've brought a report here around Local Government Elections Act and the changes to the remit of the Governance and Audit Committee as a result of that. But for this particular agenda item, it remains unchanged. So it's about monitoring the council's arrangements associated with our corporate risk register and the way we manage and monitor risks. There are 18, just a very, very brief overview of the report. There are 18 corporate risks that we've carried into Q1 of this year, remain largely unchanged from the previous quarter. The one risk that has changed is related to COVID-19 pandemic. There was a reduction in risk based on the position we were in Q1 of this year. Just to note to the committee that risk obviously will change on a fairly regular basis and is largely outside of the control of Newport City Council, and it's based on the particular epidemiological transmission of the virus and current mitigations in place from both central and Welsh Government. So that one is reduced in Q1. I suspect when we bring subsequent reports to the committee, that risk is going to increase given the infection rates that we've seen over the last few months. Just also to note in the report, we've previously had discussions with committee, and it was part of recommendations from committee around a deep dive approach to some of the corporate risks that we're dealing with. So the report picks up the first part of that, which was a deep dive from corporate management team into the risks around highway infrastructure that was in the corporate risk register. Nothing further for me to say in regards to the report, Chair. More than happy to take questions.
If I might, as Chair, just to clarify that although there's been a reduction in the risk, it's still hitting the red warning.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. It is still, even in Q1 of this year, we're still at a level which it's been monitored through the corporate risk register, and obviously figures have now increased again. So as we look at subsequent quarters, that risk is going to be increased.
Thank you, Rhys. Questions then, please. Councillor Thomas, no. Councillor Mockford, no. Councillor, no. Okay, thank you very much.
Fine.
And then moving on to item 5, I think.
It's me again, Chair.
Right, thank you, Rhys.
Okay, so as I just mentioned in the previous report, the terms of reference for Governance Audit Committee have changed in order for it to align with the Local Government Elections Act Wales 2021, and as part of that, it's the committee's function to receive and consider inspection reports from external regulators and inspectors and to make recommendations and, where necessary, monitor implementation and compliance with agreed actions. So this is your first report to the committee in relation to that new part of your role. The report covers the regulatory activity of Audit Wales, Estyn and Care Inspectorate Wales. And within your report, starting on page 64, you will see a table there which includes primarily Audit Wales activity, and that's both on a national and local level. With a series of recommendations where necessary. A number of the Audit Wales reports on a national basis are for noting and for us to just be cognizant of. There are a series of recommendations, though, particularly around local work within the report, and an action then associated with it. So in subsequent meetings, the committee will receive updates on those actions so that you can monitor our progress against those. As far as Key Inspectorate Wales is concerned, to date there haven't been any local authority or national reports published. We've had 2 inspections completed on our children's homes in the last 6 months. Reports are still to be finalised, so we haven't had the final figures, final reports back through from those with the recommendations. Estin then have undertaken a national thematic review, and that is on page 67 into 68. We have had no published local inspections from Estin either to include in this report. And again, happy to take questions on that.
As I understand it, Rhys, this is for acceptance. We can question it, but we can't amend it in any way.
It's essentially a log of the inspections that have been undertaken by those regulatory bodies and the actions associated with those. So in the next meeting, Chair, there'll be an update, so you'll be able to query our progress against those actions. But at the moment, as this is the first report, this essentially is a benchmark of where we are with those regulatory reports.
Thank you for the clarification. Are there any questions, please?
Yeah, Chair, that was just going to be my observation. I think just for this report, it's just going to be just read through it and just see what it is, and then wait to the next report and to see what other things it brings up to light with it, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Jordan. Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you very much. So I move to accept. Agreed, we accept?
Yeah, agreed, Chair.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Moving on to item 6, please. Is that you again, Rhys?
That would be me, I think. Is that the compliments, comments and complaints?
Yes, indeed.
So what Rhys has already said, so in May 2021, the Governance and Audit Committee agreed new terms of reference to align with the Local Government and Elections Wales Act. And so one of the new requirements of the committee is to make reports and recommendations in relation to the authority's ability to handle complaints effectively. And this is also the first report to the committee, and it will provide an overview of how the council manages compliments, comments and complaints, and the annual report on the council's performance during 2020-21. We have done other reports on the same thing for a number of years, and these have gone through Cabinet, and all annual statistics are passed on to the Chief Internal Auditor. So complaints about schools are reported separately as they are subject to a distinct statutory framework. However, complaints are taken about education services, so for example, where they concern administrative processes. The policies and procedures in place for compliments, comments and complaints comply with the legislative requirements of the Welsh language measures and associated standards, and social services statutory requirements remain in operation alongside the corporate policy. And so this report reflects back on the lessons learned for the council to improve and actions to deliver these improvements. So as an overview, customers can raise a formal complaint over the phone or online or using an app on their phone and face-to-face. And so the obvious benefits there is that by having an online system is that people can complain 24/7, get in touch with us 24/7, and they don't have to queue. It also offers increased accessibility and convenience. And customers do have the option of logging compliments and general comments and feedback. So it isn't just about complaints. And just as importantly, we want to be able to focus on compliments, and we will continue to remind staff of the importance of doing this. One of the Ombudsman's principles is around getting it right, and the focus is all about having trained and competent staff. There is free training available through the Public Services Ombudsman Wales. Council staff have attended, but at the moment the Ombudsman is focused on the rollout of training through the Health Board. So the complaints team, we're actually in the process of designing their own training, which will be modular based and complemented with e-learning. We're also linking in with organisational development, so that will form part of all employees' induction training in the future, and that will consider the consequences of bad customer service as well as the role of the Ombudsman. And this will also be compulsory training and sort of an annual test, just to make sure that people's understanding and focus is all around the Ombudsman's role and the part that we all play as part of that. The report details the number of compliments, comments and complaints that we have received. Last year, so we had 174 compliments, 3,111 comments and 222 complaints. And through the council's process, 208 complaints were resolved before going to the Ombudsman, and out of those the Ombudsman only intervened with 5, so it is very low. But one of the things that is noted is that across all 22 authorities, complaints were down by 12% generally from frontline services. It is anticipated that the pandemic played a large role in that, and we've already noticed that the volume of complaints coming through has gone up considerably. The Ombudsman view, though, is that all feedback is important, and they don't focus on league tables. For them, it's about making sure that we have a number of accessible routes that people can use to complain, and that we also get feedback from complainants on how we've actually dealt with their complaint as well. So what we do now is that we've recently introduced a questionnaire. So once the complaints team has finished dealing with that, we will send it out in the hope that we will get some feedback there as well on how the complaints team are performing and how they felt that their concerns were dealt with.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Very concise report. Just one question, if I might. Although this is an initial report, are there any trends that can be observed from previous years? Although I think you've partly answered it in terms of the number of plates.
Yeah, I mean, for the last sort of 12 months, it's been particularly difficult to see any particular trends. The main one really is that city services, because of obviously the volume of frontline services that city services offer in general, there was a lot of decision making and policies that were introduced to keep the public safe. And I think so, for example, there were lots of complaints initially because people had to make appointments to go down to the recycling centre and to sort of get rid of their waste. And so various decisions that were made along the way, and in terms of safety in cemeteries and the number of people who could go and parks. A lot of the complaints we received were primarily around the pandemic and the precautions that we had taken as part of that. So it's probably not the best year to start looking at the report, because it's not really a very good reflection of a typical year. So it'll be interesting to see now how the next 12 months pan out.
Thank you very much. Questions, please.
Councillor Mogford has a question.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the compliment side, because as a councillor, I do put pressure on some of the services and demand a lot from the council, but I'm mindful that I don't make as many compliments perhaps as I should, and some of the things that happen are excellent. Can you just remind us the process for making compliments and how it contrasts with the process for making complaints? Because I think people are less minded to make compliments than complaints.
They certainly are, and we've had a conversation about this, especially because we didn't receive many compliments for children's services, and yet we know that they are out there. But I think people tend to be very busy, and they feel that they haven't got the time. So I think customers themselves can compliment in the same way as they raise a complaint. It's the same form that they can fill in online. And they can ring in to make a compliment, they can record the compliment online or through their app. But I think as well, we possibly need to do more work internally as well for when staff are receiving compliments. I don't think we're very good about, coming forward and sort of giving ourselves a pat on the back, or perhaps people are a little bit shy to do that. And I think possibly we could do a bit more of a drive and a bit more of sort of marketing around that really internally, and make it easier for people just to perhaps, even if there was something on the homepage of the internet, make it really simple for them. They click on it and it's just basic information, but we could then use that and put it in our reports going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas? No. Councillor Jordan? No.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Just the one on not more, but more with the cemeteries more than anything else. Even though it's an open space and we don't get many people in there, what was the reason behind the closing the cemeteries then? Because of the pandemic? I think
they were limited, weren't they? They were limiting the number of people who could actually go in. And I think obviously there's a lot of people who couldn't attend the funerals. I'm not sure what the initial limit was, and it has increased gradually as the pandemic has gone through. But I know there was a lot of people who were upset because of the numbers that were decided that could go in any one time. And that obviously that's upsetting when you want to say goodbye to loved ones, when you're limited to the number of people who can actually attend. They have increased numbers since. It doesn't seem to be that much of an issue now, but obviously with everything else that was going on, and that on top of it then, that we're saying that you can't even say sort of goodbye to your loved ones, or they might have to wait on the main road, but they couldn't actually go into the service, and that was a very emotive subject for people.
So now most of all this, not the pandemic is sort of eased quite a bit now. Are they going to open the cemeteries up completely now to anybody to go in at all, or is it still going to be limited?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what the guidance is there, if I'm completely honest, and that's something we have to look into and get back to you.
Chair,
please.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Jordan, I think that's an operational question. It's probably best directed to the service area.
Right. Okay. No problem. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. You also mentioned, Kelly, that it's gone to the Chief Auditor. Andrew, have you had a chance to look at it yet?
Thank you, Chairman. Not for 2021. It will be incorporated within the annual governance statement for next year. So Kerry provides me with the statistics. The previous years have gone into the annual governance statement, which goes through the Governance and Audit Committee, and as part of the presentation tonight, the annual governance statement is part of the statement of accounts as well. So we've incorporated the statistics that Kerry provides into a statement that the committee has already seen, Chair. And with 2021, as I said, that will be incorporated into the 21-22 annual governance statement.
Thank you. I was particularly thinking about, as it's the first of a report of this type, it would be the benchmarking and how the benchmarking has been affected by external circumstances that hopefully won't be impacting next year. Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 7 then, please. Marion, you're taking this one, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's my deputy, and he'll kind of explain the order of things to take the committee through the accounts and everything that we've got on the agenda. A request, Chair, that we also bring forward, and we'll do it as part of this session, that we also bring forward item 11, which is the audit of the financial statements report. So that's Audit Wales's ISA 260 report. It makes a lot more sense to bring that forward and include it in the order of things to get us to the end of this agenda item. So Rob will Rob will take over now and explain how we'll order the individual items. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. Okay, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, what we'll do is we've got a number of items here. We'll start with the accounts themselves. So you've now got a set of the final accounts, item 7A on your report pack, and we've got a presentation, a covering presentation that goes with that, which is item 7B. So my colleague Mark is going to take us through the presentations. That gives you an overview of the accounts and what's contained within them. Then we'll ask Gareth from Audit Wales to take us through the ISA 260 report. So that is basically their report capturing their view on the accounts, their audit opinion, and any matters for our that have been raised for us to consider. So they'll do that, and then what I'll do is I'll return to item 7, which is the covering report, because that covering report, actually the bulk of the detail within that report are our responses to some of the issues that have been identified within that ISA 260 report, and a list of the misstatements that have been identified and corrected, and some context around those, and then we'll move to consider the recommendation within that covering report. So that's the proposal. So if that's okay with you, Chair, then I will look to hand over to Mark to take us through that presentation.
Thank you, Rob. Welcome, Mark.
Good evening, all. Just by way of introduction, you would normally expect to see Laura at this meeting presenting this. Laura has started her maternity cover at the moment, and I'm covering for her for the next 12 months. So what I've done is adopted a very similar presentation style to Laura presented to you back in July. It explains the summary position to you that the draft set of accounts was authorised for publication on the 2nd of July. This was delayed beyond our normal timetable due to COVID and staff sickness. The necessary notices were placed on the website stating the reasons for the delay as required by legislation. The accounts went on display as required and available to the public to inspect between 26th of July and the 20th of August, and we had no responses back. A separate paper, which is the paper that Rob referred to at the start of item 7, details the extent of queries raised in respect to the draft account presentations. And Chair, that covers off those 4 points that you made earlier in the action list. So you can see that those have been considered, and alongside the adjustments volunteered by Audit Wales, those are effectively the changes made since the July version that you all saw. So these final accounts reflect the amendments made during that exercise and in conjunction with the review function undertaken by Audit Wales, their findings of which are captured in that separate ISA 260 document that was item 11 and will be considered at the end of this presentation. But overall, their analysis, and from a professional point of view, I'm pleased to record that the accounts, in their view, reflects a true and fair view, which is what any professionally qualified accountant wants to hear. So I'd like Governance and Audit Committee to approve these final accounts, which will result in them being certified by the Head of Finance and the Chair. We have a bit of an unusual situation tonight insofar as I sent the draft copy to the Chair to sign, but obviously I will need to actually send on a copy to yourself now, Chair, to replace that signature.
Okay, thank you.
Just worthwhile appreciating it's quite a technical tome of the statement of accounts, just to help you with the navigation. I mean, effectively, when you're looking at any of these statements, there are 5 key statements that are in the front half of this document that are effectively the council's core document, and then there are notes explaining those subsequently in the pack. So of note is the comprehensive and income and expenditure section. Effectively, that captures all the revenue activities of the council. The expenditure and funding analysis is quite important, because you'll appreciate that through the year members receive management information in terms of performance against budget, but obviously you'll note that actually the information you receive in those documents can be a little different than the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. That's because these technical documents include things like fixed asset movements, etc., which isn't a feature of your your quarterly monitoring. So that expenditure and funding analysis actually reconciles between those two documents. Then we have a movement in reserve statements. Reserve statements being the health of the organisation to deal with contingencies and unforeseen eventualities, which is quite important. And part of this presentation will just be to take you through that position to reassure you on the health of the organisation. We touched upon the balance sheet and the fixed assets aspect. A council commonly has quite a lot of assets. And obviously this is a key point that the auditors will look at, because the significance of the figures involved with that will always be regarded as being quite material to their consideration. And then we have a cash flow statement that shows effectively the movements between cash and cash equivalents of the authority during the year. So the key messages I'd like to leave you with is that underspend on the revenue budget was £14 million, as reported to Cabinet in June 2021. That hasn't changed from the figure that was reported to you in July. The causes are exactly the same in terms of the extent of one-off receipts provided by Welsh Government. The underspends in relation to general administration and service provision during the year, as their services were less than traditional given the distance working arrangements. Underspend in general revenue contingency budgets, council tax reduction scheme and council tax income. And the consolidated income and expenditure account showed a deficit provision of 8.8 million. The capital position, the capital spend programme, again, hasn't changed since your July meeting. So the outturn was a £26 million spend, and that's necessitated a carry forward of £7.1 million worth of budget into the current financial year to progress schemes that weren't finished by the end of 2021. So we talked about the revenue underspend of £40 million. That actually gets moved into reserves at the end of the year. And so the reserve movements are net 21 million, schools underspends of 8.5 million transferred to schools reserves. That's a bit of an artificial position, because towards the end of the financial year, Welsh Government are providing schools with additional resourcing for things like schools maintenance, etc. And there's not the ability for them to progress that work in full before the end of the financial year. So as often happens, that gets put into reserves and is utilised in the following financial year. And then the other element is the underspend of the £14 million transferred to a series of reserves. So in terms of reserves, I talked about it being the health of the organisation. Effectively, you can see that we have a usable reserve balance at the 31st of March 2021 of 108 million. That's split between the council fund balance, £6.5 million. Balance is held by schools, just short of £10 million. Earmarked reserves, those are reserves set up for a particular purpose, whether those be around risk mitigation, around enabling future works, or smoothing. Of that 85 million, £42 million is made up of the private finance initiative reserve, and reflects the fact that we have ongoing liabilities into the future, which is necessary to put money aside. And then we have a capital receipts reserve. Wherever we sell anything, that money is ring-fenced into a particular reserve for use in future asset investment and affording schemes under the capital programme. Pictorially, what I've done is blown that up to actually show the effect of the risk smoothing and enabling, so that you can actually see the proportions of it. The large majority of which is the smoothing reserve and is predominantly the PFI element to it. In terms of taking the opportunity to just make you aware of some technical accounting issues. The council, as well as providing the position for 2021, as part of that position, it is allowed to put money aside for known liabilities where there is some uncertainty regarding timing and amount, and those are treated as a cost of the current financial year, even though those costs will be met in future financial years. All those movements are included in Note 24 and are termed provisions. I'd highlight the fact that a provision relates to an amount that is put aside for a known liability. There is also a note within the account which technically is called contingent liabilities. Those are elements where the amount isn't known or where there is a greater uncertainty. The difference between a provision and a contingent liability is that in a provision, physical money and accounting entries are made in relation to those items. In relation to the contingent liability note, they are just simply that, a note. The actual ledger has not been adjusted for those matters. They are merely making the audience aware of the potential. I'd like to conclude by just giving you a short examination on this year's accounts in terms of it being a challenging year and the success that we feel it's demonstrated. Ultimately, it's pleasing to get a true and fair judgment. That's despite the fact that we had some quite significant changes in personnel and reduced team capacity this year. It wasn't ideal that we lost our assistant head of finance in March. I hope I've done a good job in trying to compensate for that, but what I wouldn't necessarily have, while I have the technical ability to put together a set of accounts, is necessarily the Newport nuance. That means that I was able to proactively consider matters rather than necessarily react to them. As we mentioned, COVID continues to play a part in our accounts presentation in terms of potential complications. We received quite a lot of money late in the financial year in relation to COVID claims. There is also money that and services that the local authority is organising on behalf of Welsh Government. Those arrangements are commonly known as agency arrangements and involve us actually showing those accounts in a slightly different fashion. So we wouldn't term them as our expenditure. They would be where we are actually delivering against the Welsh Government's policy objectives. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that we made some quite significant changes in the accounts presentation this year, despite those other challenges. So this year, as part of the fixed asset work, the schools portfolio was revalued. That's probably the most significant element of our fixed assets. And obviously all the accounting and reconciliation that went alongside that was quite involved. We picked up on a point that the auditors raised last year in terms of our interest-free loan presentations from Welsh Government, and we revised that arrangement such that that they are now compliant with SIPF requirements. We also, at the same time, in relation to interest-free loans, widened the use of fair value comparators to give the audience a more fuller understanding of the financial liabilities that the council faces. We, in conjunction with the auditors, it was recognised that there are a number of cases where we provide social care services that ultimately will be repaid by the assets of customers, but that at the moment the debts aren't actually drawn against those customers, but there's a recognition that it will be settled when things like estates are resolved, etc. So what we've done is we've created a new contingent asset to reflect those outstanding social care debt liabilities. Also, a significant aspect has been involved in amalgamating the Newport Council and the Newport Transport pension transactions and showing the effect of those as if they'd occurred in previous financial years, so restating the accounts for earlier years' presentation. It might be worthwhile just touching upon the pension reporting changes. So there was a decision back in September 20 by Newport Council members to support MPT and its financial challenges. As one of the consequences of that is that historically the Newport Transport has shown its pension deficit liability within its accounts, and it's always looked a bit odd that in relation to other bus companies like Cardiff Bus Company, where those aren't shown there. So there was a motivation by Newport Council members to help with that arrangement. The draft accounts were prepared on the basis that the detail of that agreement was still to be struck, but there was a recognition that probably the liability of that arrangement would change, and that was anticipated accordingly. What subsequently occurred is that during the Newport Transport audit, their auditors queried the admitted body status that Newport Transport had versus the original intention of the transfer agreement. As there was already an appetite to help Newport Transport out financially, it was decided that we could use that original agreement in place of devising a new agreement. The upshot being that the original agreement effectively has become our primary text now going forward, and the pension entries have been consolidated into one set of accounts, effectively the Newport Council pension. The result of that is that from a group point of view, there is nil effect, because you'll appreciate that those previous liabilities were shown in two separate accounts and amalgamated in the group accounts. Well, effectively, they're still amalgamated in the group accounts. But from a sole entity point of view, Newport Transport accounts now removes that pension liability from their balance sheet, and it goes into the Newport Council accounts. And there were some changes around where Newport Transport historically would have had the responsibility to pay the pension fund the contributions that were owed in respect of its members. That responsibility, that primary responsibility, now falls to the council, and instead Newport Transport has a contractual liability to the council to pay us for the for those costs. So quite an involved and technical piece of work alongside the other changes to this year's financial accounts, but I'm pleased to conclude that the accounts will be regarded as a true and fair view. The lessons learned exercise, we're still to undertake the usual debriefing with auditors. It wasn't without challenges this year, largely around deadlines, etc., and being able to accommodate them. I think some of the judgments on early closure timetables are that there are already some trends apparent in terms of slipping timescales elsewhere in the organisation, limited staff resistance perhaps to deal with sickness issues, and one of the important caveats around early closure is an increased use of estimates, etc. Well, that use of estimates, those early testing, etc., those functions aren't yet fully embedded in the process. But what I'd like to do is to bring those lessons back into the January meeting, because I think they're probably more pertinent to the next audit process and starting that rather than actually the past audit. So that's the end of the presentation. What I'd like to draw your attention to is now the item 7, in essence, which is the response to the ISA 260 report and statement of accounts authorisation. And without stealing Rob's thunder and the response to the ISA 260, I'd just draw your attention to Appendix B. Those are the areas, Chair, which relate to the received queries and responses to them that we had in relation to the draft accounts. So you can be assured that actually all those queries have been looked at and either answered or amended in the statement of accounts.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Committee members, would you like to do questions now, or wait for Rob to do his report as per agenda item 11? Are you wishing?
Could I ask a question, Chair, before we go on to that one, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Just going back on where to is it now? 1 second. Page 122. You've got the head of finance narrative report of the statement of accounts. The total expenditure. How come in 2021, 2022, and the next 22 and 23, there's a significant jump from a total expenditure there from previous years, like 26.2 up to 100.2 and 62.36 million? Why is there so much of a jump?
Sorry, Chair, you've gone, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say that reflects the level of spend that we've historically spent on capital. So ordinarily, the council has had a programme of the order of about £30 million. This year, because things like slippage, etc., have moved costs forwards, probably a good example of that is Band B schools. So that those budgets were set up in 2018-19 and a proportion of those costs have actually slipped forward. We only have so long to actually spend that money within the 5-year window. So what it's actually doing is actually concertinaing the effect of the capital expenditure into 21, 22 and 22, 23.
Right, okay. Also as well, what is I've noticed the new when you got the head of finance certificate on page 127, you got it's been certified the statement of accounts. It's financial Newport City Council and Newport City Group. Who's the Newport City Group? Is that Newport Transport then, is it? Or
yeah, it's Newport City Council and Newport Transport. Effectively, they're a wholly owned subsidiary.
Also as well, I just might be me on page 140 as well, where you've got the annual governance statement there. You've got the stage 1 complaints of 2020 to 21 is 1,129, but Kerry in her report only suggests there was only 222 complaints.
Thank you for that. And if Andrew's on the can come in on that one.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this is just information provided for 2021 that has come through to me. If there's a difference, I'll check that and get back to you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Thomas.
Yes, can I just say that at last, and thank you to the officers concerned about the pension issue, sorry, to do with Newport Bus. We had 3 years when I was chairman of arguing with the council, and it was embarrassing at times, but at last it's been resolved, and thank you very much to the officers and the people from Newport Transport who last resolved what I thought was a very unjust way it went. We dealt with it, and I'm glad we've resolved it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Markford, did you have a question? No? Okay. I think when I would like you to thank your staff for all they've done in this last couple of years, because it has been really difficult. And as you say, you had changeover of staff and staff shortages. And I've just got one question, if I might. Is the Welsh Assembly Government's position still the same, that there'll be no clawback of the grants as per the accounts now? So the accounts are as stated, and there's no potential clawback from Welsh Assembly Government.
We're not aware of any clawback. No. It's the year is closed.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on to agenda item 11.
Chairman, can I just add something, please?
Of course.
Sorry to interrupt, Chairman. I did have my hand up. Just clarifying the question I was just asked on the AGS. 7.4 relates to Freedom of Information Act requests specifically, rather than complaints and compliments. So they are two different things. So the figures inevitably will be different.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Councillor Thomas? Yeah. Sorry, Andrew, if you put your hand up, I'm sorry, I can't see it. So please interrupt me if you feel the need.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah.
Moving on to item 11 then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And yeah, as Rob set out earlier, this is our audit of accounts report following the 2020-21 financial statement. So this is a standard report that we issue to the committee each year, summarising our audit findings. So hopefully members have had a chance to read before the meeting and see the main results of that report. Many of which have been set out there by Mark in his presentation as well. So I don't intend to take too long running through the detail of the report, but just pick out a couple of the main points really for you to be aware of on the committee. So the first point, first of all, is as Mark set out, we're proposing an unqualified, that's a clear audit opinion on the financial statements, which is clearly good news. And as Mark said, that's the standard you're aiming for. So you know, in that sense, very, very good news for the council. Just a point of detail to flag up as part of that. Mark did flag up that there are material valuation uncertainties regarding the valuation of building assets and investment properties this year. That's similar to what was in place last year as well. It's as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. A number of professional valuers are flagging that up to their clients, as is the case here. Newport North have flagged up that uncertainty to the council. That's been appropriately disclosed by the council in the accounts. It was in the draft accounts, it remains in the final accounts. Just in our audit certificate, we also raise what was called an emphasis of matter paragraph, just to draw attention to the reader to the fact that that disclosure exists. We're happy it's been made appropriately, but just to make you aware of the fact that's in the certificate doesn't affect the overall conclusion. It's still an unqualified, clear opinion. To arrive at that opinion, there have been a number of corrections made as a result of the audit process. So they're set out in Appendix 3 of our report. So you'll see a lengthy list of amendments there, but nothing in terms of the number or nature of those corrections really that gives us any particular cause for concern. They're a very lengthy and detailed and technical set of accounts. Inevitably, there are a number of technical adjustments that arise from that. None of the corrections we've raised affect the council's general fund balance. So the unspend against budget that Mark flagged up there in his presentation remains the same in the final accounts as it was for the draft. There are some uncorrected misstatements that have arisen this year. So that is some items that we've identified during the audit, which the council has decided not to correct for in these final accounts. So those are raised in paragraph 15 of our report for your information. The three adjustments that are flagged up there are all fairly minor in value, both individually and in total. The information is provided there for you to refer to and understand, but ultimately, from our perspective, the fact that they're not corrected doesn't affect our audit opinion. They're well below what we call our materiality threshold. So in our view, they wouldn't influence the reader of the accounts by not being corrected. And so ultimately, it's just raised really for your attention, but nothing further. I'd just like to draw members' attention then finally to paragraph 18 of the report. So that just sets out three further matters for members' consideration. So just briefly, the first point that's raised there, as Mark drew your attention to at the end of his presentation, was the consolidation of the Newport Transport pension provision into the Newport Council single entity accounts. So that's now being corrected for accurately in the final financial statements. It was one heck of a technical exercise, a lot of work involved. Also involved correcting some prior year figures as well for consistency and comparative purposes. So it took a lot of work really to agree and confirm that position, but we're happy that it has been done, and thanks really to Mark and the team for working with us at the late stage of the audit process to confirm that position. And two other points that are there then. One is just to flag up that as part of our audit, we review members' declarations of interest to corroborate our work over related party disclosures within the accounts. And it's just really to flag up that for 9 out of 50 members, we didn't receive any updated declarations of interest for the year. So really, it's just raised for attention. We'd just like to emphasise really, we do find that as it's a really important step. It's important for finance in terms of collating the accounts, and also ourselves in terms of performing our audit work over those related party disclosures as well. So, please do in future years, bear in mind that it is a really important step for us. That said, we've been able to do other audit work, in each of those cases to confirm that the disclosures in the accounts are accurate and complete. And the one final point is really a follow-up on an issue that was raised last year. So last year, in our testing of creditors in the accounts, we performed sample testing, and a number of the sample items we selected had been incorrectly accrued in the financial year. We've performed similar testing this year. We've actually increased the level of testing in response to the issue last year. We found one further item which was incorrectly accrued. That is one of the uncorrected misstatements, which is set out in the body of the report. We're satisfied that there's no material issue that could arise from that. We've done further procedures to confirm that. So again, it's just flagged up for your information, but no major cause for concern there. So other than that, Chair, there's no other significant issues, in my opinion, that need to be brought to your attention. And just to conclude again, that we're proposing to issue an unqualified, clear audit opinion on this set of financial statements for Newport City Council and Newport City Council Group. And finally, Chair, just to issue our thanks really to all involved in the process this year, both from the Council's perspective and also ours. It's been, quite a difficult technical process at times, but both teams have remained hugely committed to the task, and we're very, very grateful for that all round. And with that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Gareth. Any questions, please?
Rob, Chair, will take you all through a bit more detail on the issues that Gareth has just mentioned now as well, as part of his narrative report. So that should help.
Thank you. Just one point there, if I might, Marion. When you reported, I think it was last year, this under declaration of members' interest, you were going to put in place some template or procedure to make it a little easier to catch all members. Did you work forward on that?
Well, we did, and it didn't work. So so it's plan B now. The issue is because you do a similar declaration, but a different one, but similar in terms of a general declaration as part of the beginning of the kind of civic year, and we were going to incorporate this in with that. We didn't get that done in time to sort of do that, so we're going to have to do something else here that enables us to get all of these returns done. You will all know as individual members that there was a lot of chasing of these this year, both from ourselves as an email to all members, as well as your group managers, business managers also picking up the issue with you as well, and that did increase the numbers to what it was, even though we still had, you know, a number of gaps there as well. So I will be writing to those members that didn't disclose this year, just to remind them of the importance of it and seeking their cooperation next year. And we do need to work again with our Democratic Services colleagues to see if we can, if the timing works, and it should work, but that's to be confirmed, if we can do both of your declarations for the accounts and your general member declarations at the same time. So we're going to have another go, another look, and if it's possible, have another go at that again this year as well. And we're hoping that that'll work.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Gareth. Can we move back then to item 8, please? Report on Treasury management for the period to September.
Chair, I think Rob just needs to now just go through the final bits with you, and then we can conclude on this. But as a committee, you will need to vote to adopt the account and to authorise yourself and myself to sign the accounts, and Rob can explain how that actually works in this in the way that we're working at the moment. Thanks, Rob.
Rob.
Okay. So thanks, Chair. And so in effect, we're returning to item 7, which is the covering report that is in your pack. Just to give a sort of quick bit of background as to how this report came to fruition, it actually started life as an internal briefing note, and that's what Appendix A is, and that is actually the bulk of the report. So Appendix A and Appendix B, which Mark referred to earlier, which is our response to the queries and questions raised when you considered as a committee the draft account. So that is actually the bulk of the report. The covering aspect is quite brief. And I'll do my best not to duplicate on anything that's already been covered by either Mark or Gareth in their items. But those key messages, which are in the summary page, to say again, an unqualified clean audit opinion. There were 3 uncorrected misstatements. I'll go into a little bit more detail on those, and they are detailed in the report. And a range of corrected misstatements. Now, using the word range does make it sound like, you know, they're an awful lot, but as Gareth said, it's not uncommon with a document of this size and technicality that there will always be mainly presentational, but sometimes, you know, sort understanding issues to be resolved. But yeah, they've all been resolved aside from the 3 that we'll talk about in a bit more detail. And then as we go through the report, we've sort of got a section that gives our initial lessons learned, but again, as Mark said, we will return to committee with a more full review of the process this year and you know, more detailed lessons learned exercise and what we'll be doing going forward to address any issues that we've identified. As I said, the bulk of the report is in the 2 appendices. In terms of Appendix A, so this was the briefing note I referred to, which, as I said, started life as an internal document. In terms of that kind of overview section, so we've referenced the impact of the pandemic, which has certainly played its part in terms of our ability to work through the accounts closure process and production of the statement of accounts. And as Mark said, that's manifested itself in a number of ways, but critically resource impacts within the team, and then also the favourable outturn position, that £14 million underspend that was referred to, in a strange sort of way, did actually add time into the process, because obviously we had to determine, and ultimately Cabinet had to determine, how that underspend would be allocated across earmarked reserves. So that in itself did add some time into the process that wasn't a normal, you know, and wouldn't have had to that extent in a normal year. So there was a delay in the draft accounts, but I'd just like to reiterate my thanks and gratitude to those involved, and I think, you know, a huge amount of credit does need to be given to those people in terms of being able to get those accounts done, because this wasn't a normal year. It was an incredibly challenging year, but to have achieved it with only a small delay, and then having been given an unqualified audit opinion is quite an achievement. And we talked briefly about the corrections identified as being needed to be corrected by Audit Wales. So 16 areas were identified, but that number, whilst it might sound large, is broadly consistent with the previous year. So we are where we are in terms of year-on-year performance. But as I said, the majority of those were presentational issues, so it's not as though there was fundamental issues in terms of figures or disclosures within the accounts. In terms of the uncorrected misstatements, so they are identified within both this report and the ISA 260. The total impact of those 3 uncorrected misstatements is 625,000. So as Gareth said, significantly below our materiality threshold. And they are detailed in page 93 of the pack. And we've included explanations as to why those misstatements occurred in the first place. Some of them are understanding issues, some of them are simply timing issues, and you'll note that Newport Transport pension was one area involved there, and that was simply because of the timing differences between the accounts being produced in draft format and the decision ultimately being taken as to how the company would be supported in that regard. So the main reason for those misstatements not being corrected is due to the impact upon the general fund balance, and ultimately we would have needed to have moved some of those amounts to earmarked reserves, and that in itself would have necessitated the process I referred to earlier in terms of Cabinet approval, which just wasn't feasible and isn't feasible at the time of year that we're trying to resolve the audit. So that is actually something that's in our lessons learned as to what we can do to address that next year, because ideally we would like to have amended those, not had any uncorrected misstatements, but the situation we were working with meant that wasn't possible. As it happens, one of those can easily be corrected in this current financial year and will be corrected. So actually there's only 2 that carry forward and have an impact on this financial year, and it is actually a positive impact in terms of the overall sort of revenue monitoring position, because those items will reflect themselves as credits in the current financial year. In terms of the member declaration, so Gareth's already covered that, but just to reiterate, 9 out of 50 members did not submit their related parties declaration, and of a number of the submissions that were received on time were not of sufficient quality as well. So there are two aspects to this issue, and that was after, you know, officers chased a number of times for those outstanding returns. So clearly this isn't a situation that we can have year on year. We need to look at, you know, again at what we can do to address that issue. As Myron said, one thing we will be doing is writing directly to the members involved, but we will also look more generally at our process and what we can do to improve the quality and the timeliness of those returns being received, because it is critical that we have 100% compliance on that issue, unless of course there are specific exceptional circumstances. That is something we'll refer to and return to when we have our lessons learned discussion in January. In terms of the corrected misstatements, they are listed in both the Audit Wales ISA 260 report and as Appendix A1 in this report. The difference between the two being that we have added our commentary and given context as to why those misstatements happened in the first place. I don't intend to go through, there's quite a long list. I don't intend on going through them one by one, but obviously if there are any specific ones that you want to ask questions on, then we can try and address that at the end of this particular item. And then moving through Appendix A, so that briefing note, we've got our initial lessons learned section. So I've referenced 1 or 2 areas already, but there are 4 that we've already identified that we need to take another look at between now and the closure of accounts next year. So the first of those is the process for internal recharges, the second being the process for earmarked reserve approval, and particularly those that arise as part of the audit process when we don't have that opportunity to go to Cabinet and seek approval for any subsequent adjustments. So we will look at whether there's anything we can do around that to enable us to correct all misstatements, but without adding considerable time into the accounts finalisation process. So that's something we will be looking at over the next few months. Obviously, there were 1 or 2 issues picked up on provisions. One of the uncorrected misstatements related to that. So we obviously recognise that there's a little bit of technical understanding that we need to improve on. And essentially, when it is and isn't appropriate to create one, it should be noted that the uncorrected misstatement relating to provisions was simply a lack of understanding, but that's something we will address going forward. And then the final point there is around early audit testing. Mark's already referred to that in his discussion, so I won't go into that in any more detail, but that is something as well that we will need to take a look at, working in partnership with Audit Wales to agree what can realistically be tested early, and ensuring that Audit Wales have the capacity to do that as well, so that our efforts are channeled in the right direction. So that's the report, and that's the appendix. That's Appendix A within it. Appendix B, again, I won't go through that in any detail, but those points that you raised as a committee are all there, and our response to those are captured there. So that's the sort of end of that report. Obviously, if there are any questions, we'll take those as required. But ultimately, we'd like to then return to the main recommendation within the report, which asks committee to give their authorisation and take a vote on the accounts, and to recommend approval of the accounts, and therefore for the chair and Myron as Section 151 officer to sign off those accounts and the letter of representation that we need to submit to Audit Wales as part of that process. Go through the process itself now if you want me to, or do you want to take questions first?
Take questions first, please, if there are any. No. Okay. Through the process, please, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, as a committee, you'll need to take a vote on whether to approve for those accounts and that letter of representation to be signed off. Because of the way we're working at the moment, we need to do that electronically. So we will, I will, or Mark will, both of us will send out an electronic copy of the statement of accounts and the letter of representation for those, assuming you're able to drop your signatures onto those documents. If not, we do have another option that we can simply type in names, but we'll need an accompanying email to go with it from yourself to say that you were in agreement that could be done in lieu of being able to sign the accounts themselves. So that's something we need to do fairly quickly, because they're ultimately going to be reviewed and signed off by the Auditor General next Tuesday. So ideally we need to get those documents over to Audit Wales as quickly as we can. So I'll look to send out those instructions following this meeting once a vote has been taken.
Okay. Committee, in these unusual circumstances, are we content with the electronic signature? Should we agree to accept these accounts?
Yeah, agree. Yeah, agreed. Sure, yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So then I put this to the vote. Do we believe that the accounts you've discussed this evening are a true and fair view of the Newport City finances. I think that's an appropriate recommendation. Yes?
Yeah,
Great.
good, Chair. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favour?
Yep.
Yes.
All voting for in favour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So Rob will be in touch with you tomorrow, or Mark, to organise to get your signature or to get an email from you as he's described. I will be sending Rob my signature and he can then get everything sent off to Audit Wales, hopefully tomorrow, and then we'll have them sent back to us Tuesday onwards with the Auditor General's final signature. And that's it for another year. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you all who have attended. Right, can we move on to item 8 then, please?
Chair, before we do, I do have to leave at 7 o'clock. Is that an issue with quorateness?
Well, I believe so, Ray.
Okay.
That's earlier.
Well, okay. Let's see how we go.
Yeah, sorry, I should be in standards at the moment, so
Yeah.
I don't know whether they're quoted or not. Right, item 8 then, report of the Treasury Management for the period to 30th of September.
Chair, we can catch up on this one. It's a very simple report, very quiet Treasury Management period. Rob, I think Mark is going to take us through it, but it's a very quick canter because it is, it's been a very quiet period. So, Mark, over to you, and we'll catch up time here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. So effectively, this is one of 2 compliance reports that you received during the year. It basically has regard to the Treasury strategy that you set yourself at the start of the financial year and is part of the capital strategy document, and just seeks to reassure you whether those conditions and performance measures have been met or otherwise. As Marion describes, it's fairly quiet time at the moment. The general market conditions are fairly static Treasury conditions. The bank base rate remains at 1%. There is a potential rise for interest rates possible, but at the October meeting of the Bank of England committee, they retain them at the present level. We still retain a long-term borrowing need. That's mitigated at the moment by internal borrowing, and the profile of the spend this year is consistent with previous years. Effectively, we get receipts, revenue support grant and grants earlier in the financial year, and expenditure increases as the year goes on. So borrowing commonly is a feature of the latter part of the financial year. So in terms of borrowing, well, the half-year position up to September, borrowing levels have decreased by just over £9 million on the previous year-end figure. That's for 2 reasons. A, we've got a proportion of our loans that are redeemed through equal instalments of principal, and obviously the principal reduces the loans outstanding. And we had a large maturity loan that we've redeemed, which hasn't been replenished. So I talked about receipt levels being higher at the start of the year, and then expenditure using those receipts as the year goes on. So it wouldn't be a surprise to you to know that investments also increased by 4.1 million to 28.9 million against the equivalent year-end position. So that's where we are in a nutshell in terms of any important things to raise to you as members. Lobos is obviously quite an emotive subject within councils. There's been no call upon those Lobos. That means that the rates have had to change or that we've had to redeem them. The only other matter of significance is revision to the financial code, which constrains local authorities that use their treasury function to invest for yield or returns. That means that they're no longer able to use the Public Works Loan Board as a cheap source of funding, and that where any authority is in that condition, that there are quite significant and punitive penalties. Hopefully that's given you just a quick synopsis of the report. Obviously there's a lot of detail in there if you wish to get a background. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark.
And Chair, this report will now go to Cabinet with your comments and thereafter to Council.
Have we any comments? No.
Fine.
No. So we just need to say we're content with this report.
Yes.
On it?
Yes, I think, Chair, I think you just need to register that there were no comments made and the report was noted and noted that it will be passed on up to Council as is required.
Move we note the reports. All those in favour? Yeah.
Yes, Chair, yeah.
All in favour, I think.
Thank you, Chair.
The next one we move on to then is item 9, which is the Audit Wales reports for financial sustainability.
Thank you, Chair. This is my report. I think Audit Wales are here. Yes, Gareth is here. So this is the second year that the Audit Wales have done this financial sustainability report. In some guises, it will now be an annual assessment that they will be doing. Albeit I suspect that the process and what they do might kind of sort of change and develop. Because of the COVID situation, things were delayed, and actually we have been delayed as a council in responding to their first year kind of observations and recommendations as the report sets out. The report is very positive and shows the council to be in a good, strong position, but it does highlight a couple of challenges, which were made last year as well, and we are now starting to put resources to. So one is the developing a sustainable medium-term financial plan. So the council is very aware that it needs to do that, and that will be start next year as we also develop the council's new corporate plan with the new administration after May. So the intention is to deal with that issue alongside that as well. And another issue raised in the report was the relatively high levels of borrowing, or the high levels of commitment to borrow that the council has, and therefore just flagging up a potential future sustainability challenge that could bring if there was to be a downturn in funding, or even a big increase in kind of other service pressures as well. Beyond those, a very positive reports that shows the council to be in a good place. I don't know if Gareth wants to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Marion. Yeah, that's an accurate summary really of the report, and I wouldn't have too much more to add other than that. I suppose just to give a bit of context as to where the report has come from. So these local reports are being issued to each of the 22 local authorities in Wales. So it's not Newport specific, as said. Obviously the report focuses on Newport, but each council will receive their own report. And each of those 22 reports then feeds into a national summary, which was published in September this year, and that's available on our website for more information. Effectively, what these reports are trying to do really is just to cut through the hundreds of pages of local authority accounts and try and distill them into some key messages that readers can see and follow to understand what a council's position is. As Marion said, Newport's position is comparatively strong. A couple of things to focus on, which he's flagged up there and talked through, and they're in his covering report. But yeah, happy that's an accurate summary really of the position as it stands, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Are we content with the report, which seems very positive? Yep.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah, happy, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Mockford. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you,
So
Chair.
we can move on then to item 10, internal audit. Gareth, I think that's you.
Sorry, Chairman, that's me, Andrew.
Andrew, sorry, Andrew.
Yep, no problem. I'll keep it brief, Chairman, as members should be familiar with this format of the report, as it's one of the regular reports I bring to your attention in terms of the performance of the team and the information and opinions which you've issued in accordance with our audit plan. So this relates to the first 6 months of the year. It's in two parts. It's in relation to the performance of the team and the opinions which we've given to hopefully give committee members the assurance that there is adequate arrangements in place across all council services in terms of internal control, governance and risk management. So in terms of the team, just a brief background, we still have an establishment of 8 staff. We have 7 staff working within the team at the moment, and we are supported by an external internal audit provider, which is helping us to complete the plan. In terms of the COVID situation, that is still impacting our audit delivery, in that our site visits and primarily school visits are on hold for the time being, and we are in discussions with the education management about when we can look to go back in and revisit schools, which will probably be in Q4 of this financial year, and we'll be reporting back to committee in due course. So in terms of performance, the main indicators we have, Chairman, are that we've completed the agreed audit plan in accordance with the target, and that's set out on paragraph 15, which shows that we've achieved 30% of the plan to date, as at the 30th of September, and the issuing of draft reports has been done within 6 days against a target of 10, and issuing of finalisation reports is being done within 4 days against a target of 5, which is reassuring. In terms of outstanding reports that were in draft as at the end of March, 12 out of the 14 have now been finalised, which is good progress. Just to give members assurance as well that we are still promoting the sound financial management across all service areas in the financial training we provide, and we've undertaken 5 training sessions where we are raising awareness of expectations of the financial regulations of the organisation. In terms of opinions, that's a positive story. We've issued 9 audit opinions as at the end of September, 3 good, 6 reasonable, and no unsatisfactory audit opinions as at that date. We've also issued 5 grant claim audits, which we've undertaken during the year, all of which have been unqualified, which is positive, as i.e. they were compliant with the terms and conditions of the grant provider, which is good news. And we've also been involved in the collation and publication of the annual governance statement, which you've heard about already this afternoon. If I could just refer members to the appendices then, Chairman, very briefly. Appendix A sets out a year-on-year comparison and a quarter-by-quarter comparison of our key performance indicators. 2021 is there just for information, really, but as you're already aware, the team were otherwise occupied dealing with kind of fraud issues in relation to Welsh Government grants and TTP as support. So our audit work was limited, so therefore the PIs were not reported during 2021. That'll pick up in 21-22, as I've reported Q1 and Q2. Just to reiterate that our 30% completion of the plan is dead in line with our target of 30%. In terms of assurance and the opinions which you've issued, that's laid out in Appendix B as at the 30th of September. Summary of the opinions which I've just talked about, and then that goes into detail, splitting up the individual jobs of good, reasonable and unqualified in terms of the grant claims which were issued. Next is a list of non-opinion work which the team have been involved with in the first 6 months of the year, and Appendix D just sets out some definitions of what our opinions relate to in terms of a level of assurance and what unqualified and qualified means in terms of the grant reports which we've been involved with. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Questions then, please. I suppose the only question is, Andrew, are you content that you cover out the workload by the end of the year, with the exception of the education ones you talked about?
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's a very good point. That's something we will need to reassess, because we've currently got a long-term sickness within the team, and the support that we're getting externally is limited. So myself and my managers will be looking at that in the next couple of weeks to see what we can practically achieve by the year end. And I'll be reporting back in January to Governance and Audit Committee about what position we're likely to be in terms of managing our expectations of the resources we've got, but we will prioritise the work going forward.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman.
All content to accept that report?
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 12, waiving of contract standing orders. Are you taking that one as well, Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that's me again. Yeah, again, this is another regular report which we bring to Governance and Audit Committee. It's in relation to urgent reports, which is Standing Order 24, or waiving of contracts standing orders. This time round for the quarter, for the quarter July to September, there's been one report that went through as an urgent decision, and my role is to give you as committee members assurance that there was an appropriate reason for doing so. This relates to post-16 home to school transport costs. A cabinet member took the decision, and within the report, the detailed report, there is an appropriate justification for the urgent decision, and it's been recorded appropriately. So I'm happy with that one, Chair, and wouldn't like to bring any other issues or concerns to your attention.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, please? No. We intend to accept that report.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
And that brings us on to future work programme, agenda item 13. And right, I note that it runs through the next council elections. Is that normal? No?
Chair, I can look at that because obviously the council AGM always sets forward the dates for the future year, so I can double check that and amend it in January's committee.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And Chairman, just for me, in January 2022, it's noted that the internal plan progress Q2 will be reported. That'll come off, Chairman, because I've reported that this evening.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I was going to note that it seems quite ambitious again, the number of items per meeting, but are we all content to accept them? Yeah, thank you very much. There's no other business, I don't think, so thank you all very much for your attendance and your forbearance this evening.
And could I just thank you, Councillor Lorraine, for chairing the meeting. Excellent job.
Thank you for very much. Yeah.
Yes, we put him in that position, didn't we? Chuck him at the deep end. Yeah, good work, Phil.
Excuse me, I've got to go and try and see if I can join standards. Good night.